So now we reach the hands-on. The idea during this hands-on is to teach you how to add your own workflow in the sandbox server, obviously not in the main server. You won't have right for that. So to make it simpler and also split, let's say, the difficulties or challenges in doing so, we will work with simple images so that the image analysis part is not the main issue here, no? And I will also impose you, so to say, to work on an Imagej macro, okay? Not something else. But keep in mind that you can use it for virtually anything, as we've seen before. And actually, in a second step, maybe on your own, you can also try to integrate something else, no? But so we will work on a specific set of images and all on an Imagej macro as the workflow will integrate. Also, to make it simpler, we will just start by replicating an existing workflow so that we have on the BIAFLOWS repository on your own GitHub by a procedure that is called fork. Okay, so you can just copy the content of this repository. It will go on your own GitHub. And then from your GitHub, you will be able to customize the workflow in a second step. So you will rename the workflow to make it your own. And then in a second exercise, you will also be able to modify the Imagej macro to do something else, perform some other operations. No? And at the very end of the sessions, we can then compare how well your own workflows perform by benchmarking them in the sandbox. So to reach this point, as you've been shown before, on the GitHub repository, we will have to deal with 4 files. Okay, so the Docker file that will set the environment, the execution environment, we won't touch it. We will use the Docker file that is already written for a template workflow, which is an Imagej macro for object segmentation. Okay, so we will work with this same Nuclei images that Raphaël has shown first. Then you will have to modify in the second exercise the Imagej macro to add your own code there. And of course, since probably your own code will have its specific input parameters, you will have also to tweak the descriptor file of the workflow to change these parameters and their default values. No? And you can also add a description of your own workflow from this file. This file, the wrapper script in Python, we will almost not touch it. We will only reflect in this file the same parameters that are configured here have also to be reflected in that file, but this is a small change, okay? So here is the problem we're going to deal with. It's a segmentation of nuclei. You see a sample image here. And the result should be a label mask, no? So an image of same size, a 16-bit image in that case, with background set to 0. And each object should have a unique ID, no? From 1 to whatever number of objects you have in the images. So you can find these images in the problem called Nuclei segmentation, either on the main instance or on the sandbox, no? And the macro, so as I said, we will first use an existing macro, an already configured workflow. The macro will take as input 2 folders, an input folders with the images and an output folder where the label mask should be written. Okay, it will process the omitif or TIFF images from this input folder and then output the label mask, one for each image. No? And also, well, we will look at the code of the macro a bit more in detail once you have forked this repository on your own GitHub. But the image files that you write as in the output folder should also have the same name as the input images. Okay. This is basically exercise 1. So I quickly describe the steps that you're going to perform, and then We will go one by one. We have slides for each step. Don't worry, you will be guided. What you definitely need to do the practical is a GitHub account and with your credentials that you can access, and a Docker Hub account. So this was in the homework that I sent. I don't know if somebody of you don't have this, please let us know so that we can wait a bit that you create them, because this is something that you really require. So do you all have it? I cannot follow the chat. So,
maybe you can use the raise hand or yes functionality of the chat if you have it.
Yeah, but when I don't have Docker Hub yet.
So Linda, you should go to Docker Hub website and create an account there.
Okay.
Oh, I think I'm.
So Linda, we let you do it. But we will wait for you, of course, before starting the exercise. But I will go on with the next steps. Just that you're aware of what we're going to do. So the next step will be to fork an existing workflow repository from the BIAFLOWS repository to your own GitHub. No, so it's quite simple to do. It's basically one click. Then we will rename the GitHub repository that you forked to make it your own, so that your name is reflected, for instance, and we know which workflow is which at the end. Then we will create a new, well, repository is not really the word, a new Docker image on Docker Hub, and link the building of this image to the GitHub workflow repository that we set up before on your own GitHubs. Okay. Then we will trigger a release of the workflow. So this is performed from GitHub. So as I said, like for this first exercise, you won't modify anything. So you will all have the same workflow, but that's fine. And then once we release the workflow, the image will be built automatically by Docker Hub. And then BIAFLOWS will collect these images and make them available from the UI. So you need a small manual configuration for this, and we will also guide you through this. There is a step missing, I'm sorry, on the slide, but that's the first thing we're going to do is, of course, to make the sandbox aware that you're going to store some workflows on your own GitHub and Docker Hub. So this is called a trusted source. Okay, so the first thing we will do together is to go to the sandbox server and add your GitHub and Docker Hub account as trusted source. Okay, because this is the only way like the system can check your workflow when you will release it. So before this, we will wait for Linda. Linda, please tell us when you have.
I'm done. Okay. I have an account now.
You have it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So then let's move to the first step. Sorry. Yeah, so this slide, I think we should come back to it later on. I would keep it for later on. So you have in mind that we have these 4 files in the repository. We already described it several times. So maybe once we all went through the exercise, we will come back to this slide so that you really understand how everything is somehow interconnected, no? From these files to the BIAFLOWS server. The first thing we're going to do, and it's quite simple, is to add your GitHub and Docker Hub as a trusted source. Okay, so this is on this slide. Do you all have the slides also, so that you can maybe have them as reference on your local machine while I switch to to doing it myself, so that you can see the steps. If you don't have the slides, please say something in the chat and we will send you a link. I shared it at the beginning. Okay, I think somebody. Okay, the link is, Raphaël has copied the link, this bit.ly link, okay? If you click there, you will find the slides. Okay, so I close the presentation. You open a browser. Here I'm using Chrome, but it should work with any browser. And you connect to the Sandbox server, okay? So you probably have the links somewhere. If not, it's not so difficult. It's just biaflows-sandbox.newbias.org, okay? You type this in, okay? So, well, actually, when you do it for the first time, you don't see this page, but this page. So then you can click on Try Online, okay? That's the way to enter the system. And from this page, you will click on Workflows page because we want to add new workflows. So it's related to workflows, this trusted source mechanism. So you click on Workflows. So here you can also see all the workflows that are in the system and search them. But you want to go down at the bottom of the page and you will see this trusted sources section, okay? So as you can see, we already have many trusted sources. They are basically our names, the tutors, and also the students from the yesterday session, okay? And maybe some others, I don't know, but there are already many trusted sources. So to add your own trusted source, you click on this blue button here, okay? New trusted source. And you will see GitHub on top here and Docker here, okay? So here you should type in your GitHub account username. So in my case, it's Sébastien TS, okay? And then your Docker Hub account username as well. So in my case, it's also Sébastien TS, okay? So you fill in these two fields. And then importantly, you need to set this prefix to W underscore. So this tells BIAFLOWS that when it's parsing the repositories on your GitHub, it will only look for repositories starting with this prefix because you have other things on your repository, not only BIAFLOW workflows probably. So it's a way not to select only the relevant repositories, and it should be set to this prefix. So once you've done this, you just click on Save, and you should see your name in the trusted source. I won't do it because I'm already here. You should see your name and the correct usernames and for GitHub and Docker Hub. Okay. Actually, my GitHub had a capital T here. They are slightly different. I see it in the trusted source. So be very careful. Exactly use the same cases as your usernames for both and save. Okay. So I assume you could all do it. If you have any issue, please interrupt us by voice. I think it's easier so that I can stop. Since nobody is speaking, I will move to the next step. Okay. So actually, I think it's on you, Raphaël. The next step is the forking, and Raphaël will show it. Yeah. So I stop sharing. Okay.
Okay. So I guess you can all see my screen now. So I'm checking that, yes, I guess we all have almost everyone here that has added the trusted sources. So now the next step, if you go to slide 45, is indeed to fork. For the sake of time, as Sébastien explained, we will fork an existing workflow. So instead of starting from scratch, we will start with existing files. But in the documentation of NeuBias, you have the full description of all the steps for if you want to start from scratch. But in general, we suggest to start from existing workflows. For example, if you want to add a workflow using IC or cell profiler or anything, you go on our GitHub repository, you look for other workflows that are using the same platform. Maybe you can fork them or get inspiration from them to start to develop your workflow compatible with BIAFLOWS. So forking an existing workflow, it's quite easy. So you will go to our NeuBias repository, so github.com/neubias-g5. Okay, and there you see that we have many workflows and stuff there. But let's look for this nuclei segmentation Imagej workflow. So you click on it. So it's, as we said, the files that describe this workflow, and you forked it here on top right, and you select where you want to fork it. So you select your GitHub account. And so now I have this workflow in my own account, but we want to change the name of it because otherwise they will all appear the same in the BIAFLOWS at the end. So we will change the name of it. And so I think on the slide 45, yes, we recommend some nomenclature here. So basically,
Raphaël?
Yes.
Maybe just let's make sure like everybody could fork. You have the link in the chat to the original repository in case you couldn't fix this. So you have the link in the chat. And again, please say something if you couldn't fork and you need that we wait.
Yes, of course, when I'm presenting, I don't see easily the chat, so use your voice, or Sébastien told me if someone is talking. So now I assume that everyone did the fork, so we will rename the workflow, the repository in your GitHub account. So you click on settings, and here you change the name. So let's do W_, then your initials, Raphaël Marée, RM in my case, then I2K for the tutorial, then Imagej nuclei segmentation. So I copy pasted this name from the slides and change basically the initials. So you click on rename. And so you have the new name here. Quite easy. But then what you have to do, because we copied the files from the NeuBias account, you have to edit some files. So if we go to slide number 46, it mentions that we have to modify the descriptor.json file so that we have the correct names of the GitHub repositories and the Docker Hub image there. So let's open the Docker file. Of course, I'm doing all this through the GitHub website so that it's easy, but you can of course do all this with the command line of GitHub on your own computer. But let's open it here. Click on the edit button here. Go down. And so here you have the name. It's actually the name that will be displayed in the BIAFLOWS user interface. So let's say I will take RM I2K, EJ, etc. So you have to change the name here. If you want to change the description, you can also do it. Let's say I2K test, blah, blah, blah. Then very important here, you have to change the container image here. because you want to let BIAFLOWS knows where he has to pull the Docker Hub image. So in my case, you have to change this to your Docker Hub user account. So in my case, it will be this one. And very important, you have also to change the name of the workflow, but you have to use lower cases. So in my case, it's this. So Sébastien, etc. I guess I'm okay. I did not make any mistake. I think it's okay.
Yeah, no, there is nothing in the chat. These people are following.
So it's very important. It's a very common mistake that the names here are not correct. Sometimes people make mistakes with the names here of the Docker Hub account that should be in lowercase, and also with the name of the workflow that should also be in lowercase. So then I commit changes. Okay. So if I go back to the presentation slides, maybe this slide, we change the trusted source, we change the descriptor. But now we will keep the other three files exactly the same because we will use exactly the same macro, the same Fiji version, etc., etc. So that we don't have to change this. If you want to have a look at this file, of course, you can do it. But here we will not change this. But maybe what I can show you is that in this descriptor, there is also this command line. That's basically the command line that will be used by BIAFLOWS server to pass the parameters value from the user interface to the Docker image. In the Docker file, you also have the fact that when creating the software environment for the workflow at the end, it will add this wrapper file and it will say, okay, this is the starting point of my Docker environment. And in the wrapper file that is executed, it's a Python file. We don't have to change it here because we use exactly the same thing, but it's basically what it does, it connects. So you have to realize that it's a file that will be executed within the Docker environment. So it connects first to the BIAFLOWS server. It downloads the images from the problem that you are working on. Then it runs a command. Here it's a system call to Java and Imagej in headless mode. Then it's using the macro that we have in the Github repository. Then it's using these parameter values that are also described previously. So it runs the macro, which will generate the label mask into the output path. And then we have a step that upload these annotation. So this step will convert the label mask from your workflow into BIAFLOWS. So it basically uploads the contours of the object that were detected. And then last step, it computes the metrics locally on your in the Docker environment, and then it uploads the metrics to the BIAFLOWS server. So let's go back to slide 47. So we will now create a Docker Hub repository and link it to the GitHub repository so that each time there is a new release in your GitHub repository for the workflow, it will automatically create a new image on Docker Hub, and hence BIAFLOWS will detect that there is a new release, and it will automatically install it in the web interface. So let's go to Docker Hub. So this is my main page of Docker Hub. So actually I will delete this because I already created it a few hours ago. So don't look at this, I'm just deleting this workflow here so that I can recreate it. Okay, so you go to create repository. You put the same name than the one in the descriptor JSON file. So if I go back to the descriptor here, it's this name that you have to copy paste when you create the repository on Docker Hub. So here you select your account, and here you put the exact same name than in the descriptor file. You can have a description if you want. And then you click on create. So now there is a repository on Docker Hub. Next step is to link this repository to the GitHub repository. So you go to builds, then you click on link to GitHub. I think I'm on the next slide now. It's slide 48. So link to GitHub. You select the source repository on GitHub. So it's your username on GitHub. Then in the list, you select among your repositories the ones that correspond to your workflow. It's this one, in my case. Should be also the same for you, W underscore your initials, etc., etc. So there is only a few steps now, and we are almost done. So you keep all this as it is. What you have to change here is some information. So if you go to slide 48, you have the exact information that you should put there. So let's do it. Source type tag basically means that it will enable an auto build every time there is a new tag or a new release on GitHub. Then you put this wildcards here. Then the source ref in the Docker tag. Then the Docker file location. Then the build context, you leave it empty. And then you keep the auto build, but you disable the build caching. And now you can click on save.
Short question in between. For me, this connection doesn't work. So it somehow doesn't connect to GitHub. Is that something known or?
So do you have any error message or anything?
So actually when you click, I click still the link to GitHub button, and then it comes like linked accounts. And if I say connect or so, it still shows me like the password blah from GitHub. And then it says something like, when I log in, that the browser did.
Screen, Jan, because Marion is the same problem, it seems. Maybe you could share your screen and we.
Yeah. Okay. Wait a second. So can you see that?
Yes.
So actually, so I was here. Blah, blah, blah. I was here. So far it worked. Clicked on that. And then I got here, and as soon as I try to connect, that's the next step, right? Or did I something wrong? And then it just so gives me my credentials, and if I try to sign in, it just says like, your browser did something unexpected, please contact us if the problem persists. So this might be, I'm in Firefox, I don't know if that's a problem.
Do you have any extension installed, or because it could be that?
No.
Because I use Firefox, I had no issue, but I have no extension installed on it.
Can you try with Chrome, or you don't have it installed? Or?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll try it. I'll try it shortly. And then,
Marion, you have exactly the same issue.
Marion solved.
So yeah, now it's fine. It's just that I was stopped. I had to stop at this step and I got lost, but I managed to get the connection. So I'm also using Firefox, but I don't have extensions or stuff in particular. So
maybe could someone in the tutors make a Google search to see if this is a common issue for Jan?
yeah, anyway, so I'll try with Chrome, and so you can continue. I don't want to keep up the process. I can follow still.
Okay.
So just one question. Once you have linked your Docker Hub to your GitHub, you need to go back to the repository and to add some, to change some settings, right?
Can you repeat? Sorry, I missed.
Once you connected your Docker Hub to GitHub, you need to go back to the repository on Docker Hub and add some settings, right?
You're muted, Raphaël.
Okay, so let's show me again. Once you create the repository on Docker Hub, you have to go to builds here. Do you see it?
Yeah.
And then you have to follow you have to configure it like on slide 48.
Okay.
Go to builds, and then you have to modify the build rules according to what we put on slide.
Okay, yeah, I found it.
Okay, good. So
okay, Chrome doesn't even let me get in Docker Hub, but anyway.
So we will try to have a look, Volker, Romain, or someone else, maybe make some Google search. Or
Do you want also to break room so that we can split?
I will do the next step because it takes some time in the background, and we will get back to you, Jan, after the next step.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So now the next step, so now you have a link between GitHub and Docker Hub, and so on slide 49, what is needed is to create a new workflow release on GitHub. So we go back to GitHub this time. And you can go here to the tags or here to the release button. It's the same. If you go to the tags, then you click on release. And here what you have to do is to draft a new release. So let's say I will make a new release. You use the convention that you want, but here I just use a semantic versioning, a stupid numbering of my version, but let's do it. Just put some description. It's not mandatory, but and then publish the release. And so now you have published a release of your workflow on GitHub. And so if things are working well now on Docker Hub, I will refresh the screen. Yes, it's here. It's detected something a few seconds ago. It will build a Docker image based on the version 0.0.1 that I just released on GitHub. So it's still pending. So this is a step that could take some time. And here we are relying on the Docker Hub servers. So usually in the morning, it's quite fast, but I noticed that today, starting in the afternoon, it's slowed down. So that's also why it's related to the question of Tongli. We would like to extend BIAFLOWS so that administrator of a BIAFLOWS servers could configure a local Docker server to build the images instead of relying on Docker Hub. So now we might wait a few minutes, and so maybe we could take this time to try to solve Jan's problem, or if anybody else.
I don't know if it was the problem, but I had an anti-tracker switched on, so potentially that blocked it somehow. I don't know.
Yeah.
So does it work now, Jan?
The connection seems to work, yeah. I just need to do the setup, but yeah.
Yeah, it's some extension may block the access. That's not a problem.
So Jan, do you want us to cover the steps for you again? While the
no, I'll use the slides, and with the slides, I think it should work.
As you wish, because we have to wait a bit that everything compiles. So unless Raphaël is tired, I guess he can go through the steps with you again, as you wish.
Shortly, if you have the time, okay, but I don't want to bore the rest.
Okay, so let's. Yeah, but okay, I will go back to Docker Hub then and go back to. It's this one, I think. So you created the repository and then you linked to GitHub. And then you have to configure the build rules here.
And in which tab is that?
It's the build tab, which this one. When
just one thing. First, Jan, you need to create the repository and make sure the name is the same as in the JSON file.
The repository I have, yeah.
Which can be tricky. So yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then the build tab here.
It's a little bit slow.
And then you, yeah, because I already did it, you don't see the same thing than my screen, but you should see this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's here. So you have to edit here source type to tag, source with this wildcards, Docker tag source ref, Docker file location / leave build context empty, and disable build caching, and then save. Let us know when it's done.
Looks like it doesn't do much anymore. So.
If you want to share it, share your screen, you can do it. So maybe refresh this. And go down. Maybe go back to the go up. Configure automatic builds. Okay.
Have you created a
Yeah,
new
no. It's yeah. The release is not yet created on GitHub, so that was the next step. So it's normal. So stop sharing. I will Okay. So you go to GitHub, and then here you click on. You can click on tags or release here. You click on release, and then draft a new release. Here you put a tag version. You can put anything. You can put a release title if you want, a short description, and then publish release. I will not do it because I just did it a few minutes ago, but please do. And now back to Docker Hub, you should see something happening. So first you will see pending, then you will see in progress, and then you should see a green message saying that it's done. So this step, it's a bit tricky, but for a given workflow, you only do this once. It's only the new release when you change your workflow, you change parameters or you change something in your code. Each time you change something, you create a new release on GitHub, and then Docker Hub will do the stuff automatically. You don't have to reconfigure it. And BIAFLOWS will also be aware of it. So the new version should appear in the BIAFLOW user interface a few minutes after Docker Hub has built the image.
Okay, let's see.
Ian, can you see something in progress?
At the moment in Docker Hub, it still looks the same.
You don't have these automated builds appearing if you refresh?
Nope. Yeah, but anyway, potentially I did some, I don't know, tiny mistake somewhere.
But we are still waiting for Docker Hub to build things, so we still have time. It should work. So
share your screen if you want, Jan, and maybe some other people have issues. I don't know.
It for me it basically looks still the same.
Quick question. Is it possible to build the image locally and push it to Docker Hub without, because I did that and it actually finished pretty quick, but I'm still waiting on Docker Hub to build it. So
sorry, what are you asking? If we can put directly an image on Docker Hub, or?
Yeah, if I built it locally and just pushed it to Docker Hub, is there a way to use that?
I never tried this. So you build the image locally or something like that? Yeah.
But then maybe you will use the link, you know, with the GitHub. Well, the naming should be exactly the same. And, yeah.
Yes, you can do it if your have checked out your GitHub repository, you can build the Docker locally and then push it to Docker. It will just be BIAFLOWS will just scan for the new releases on Docker Hub, so that will also work.
Okay, and I assume I need like some sort of tag, or is it just any tag, or does it have to be a specific format for the tag name?
So yeah, you want to keep this in sync with the tag, with the version number of the release on GitHub. That is what we're counting on.
Got it.
So Jan, can you open your descriptor.json file? Go down. So is the image name there exactly the same than the one you use in Docker Hub? Can you copy paste the? No,
it's not this name. You should copy paste, Jan, and it's probably the mistake. The image name. So if you go down
below, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this one. Maybe you can. So first do a.
It's the same, yeah. So it's WJB and then rest in all lowercase. Because I copy pasted it before, so I think there was no typo.
Can you refresh again?
Can you maybe check the release on GitHub if it was correctly done or if it was done? Can you open the release panel of your repository?
On GitHub.
So
yes, then
that was the one.
Should work.
Is it okay to have some letters in at the end of the version?
Yes, yes,
okay.
It should work.
So I refreshed. It took longer this time to refresh, but
go down. Nothing is happening now.
So maybe you should delete this link and recreate it. Maybe there was an issue when Docker created the connection and.
Yeah, so go to settings. No, just below. No. Yeah. No.
Higher.
Higher. You go. You have general tags. Yes, this one.
You can delete.
Repository. Delete. Yeah. You have to copy paste the bold. Yeah. Okay, so now everyone should look at it. Create repository. So, yeah, okay.
No.
Right?
You have to configure, I believe, the automated builds.
No, first create.
Okay. Okay, you can do in 2 steps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go to builds.
And then connect again, or?
Yeah. Yeah.
Point star, right?
Yeah.
That was
source ref between brackets or braces. Yeah.
And context was empty. Right? Or did I miss something?
Yeah, it's good.
So maybe in parallel for others, because I see that Tongli has already deployed the workflow on BIAFLOWS. So Tongli, you should go to BIAFLOWS sandbox server.
Jan, you probably need to trigger a new release. Sorry, after rebuild. Yeah.
Tongli, you can go to nuclei segmentation problem, then to configuration, but I will do it for you. I enable the workflow in the configuration tab, and then Tongli, you should be able to run a workflow. You go to workflow runs, then click on the run a workflow button.
Okay.
I'm now running the workflow from Tongli.
So Raphaël, you want to cover the last steps for exercise 1, so to add the workflow in BIAFLOWS, etc.
Yeah. So for Jan, it's okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think you need to draft a new release after having created the repository on Docker.
Yeah, I did that before as well, but anyway, but this time it recognized it.
So now
Thanks.
the final step, which one is it? So slide 51. So you in my case, the build is success on Docker Hub. And as we already configured BIAFLOWS, it was the step 1 to use the trusted source. Remember, it was here in workflows. We added trusted sources here. I have my trusted source here. So it automatically, I see that now we have 3 of them. We have my workflow, the one from Tongli, and the one from Marion Louveau that are there. So they are automatically injected into BIAFLOWS. And if you create a new release on GitHub, then after a few minutes, the new release will also be there. So again, if we open the Marion workflow, we can see the code here. It's on Marion account. We have the code here. But then to launch the workflow, you go to problems. It was related to nuclei segmentation. I open it. Then it's something you have again to do once for a workflow. You don't have to do it for all the release, but only the first time. You go to configuration, then to workflows. And here you have the list of all the available workflow on the platform. And the first time they are like in disabled mode, so you have to enable them. So that now when you go to workflow runs, you can actually it's a bit slow here, I don't know why. Yeah, okay. Do you still get me?
So you were stuck for a few seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, the connection was, yeah. Now you're back.
Okay. So I selected Marion workflow here, then change the value, and then run it. And here you see the one from Tongli was correctly executed. So you can see the objects that were detected by the workflow of Tongli, which is exactly the same, should be exactly the same than the one we already have, because we exactly use the same one. So if we activate here the metrics, this is the metrics related to the workflow from Tongli, which are exactly the same of the standard workflow, because I use exactly the same values. But the one for Marion, I changed the values of the parameters. You see it detected more objects. And so once it's finished, we can display the metrics of Marion workflow, which are a bit different because I change a bit the parameter values. So that's it. It was a bit difficult in some places, but once you are used to, we think it can go quite quickly.
So my workflow is still not clear.
So who is talking? Sorry, Conrad?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
there's like an echo. So yeah. Not sure what's going on with my microphone.
I think it's coming from Raphaël.
So Conrad, do you see the build on Docker Hub?
Yes, so my build completed, and it looks like it's there, but it's not, and I have a trusted source, but it's not showing up in the workflows.
You might want to click, if you haven't done that yet, you might click on refresh next to your trusted source.
Yeah, I tried that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if maybe I messed up one of the namings.
Yes, it might be that there is a mismatch in the names somewhere between the descriptor JSON file. So if you want to share your screen, we can have a quick look.
Okay, let me pull it up.
Another option is to copy paste maybe the GitHub link to the chat so that we can all have a look quickly.
Can you see my screen here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is what I have.
Yes, Conrad, could you copy paste the link to your GitHub repository
Sure.
so that we can all have a look maybe at the files? And
yeah. Chat.
Maybe also share with us the Docker Hub page, not the link because we will not have access, but share your screen so that we can double check that the names are correct.
I think I found the problem. Yeah, it's a bit tricky. You have a dash instead of underscore, and you have a you have a removing dash also. So your project name is this one, and the name should be this one.
So you're saying this and this?
That should be that.
I'm not sure it should cause an issue, this one.
But you entered that.
No, Benjamin, the name in the descriptor is fine. It's just the name in the UI of BIAFLOWS. So if we want to, we need to.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I copy paste the wrong name. Sorry. Check again.
Here's what I have. Yeah, I do.
No. I think I'm right because the image name should be the lowercase version of the GitHub project name, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's a wrong.
So that's
Okay,
wrong,
so
right?
this. Okay, I changed that.
Yeah, there's indeed an issue here, but it was not due to the name in the descriptor.
No, it's due to the name, the
Yeah,
image name in the descriptor. Sorry. So I was right. I'm sorry.
So is it clear what you have to change?
Let me copy paste what's wrong here. So you have that in your descriptor, but you should have. I'm sorry. You should have.
It's all dashes instead of underscore, right?
You should have something like that. Okay.
Okay, let me try that.
So Conrad, once you change this, you will need to trigger a new release and unfortunately wait for the Docker Hub to compile. So yeah, these are bugging issues with the naming. Yeah.
If it can make you comfortable, I did the same mistake.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's the most common mistake. We all do it.
I think there's a second one where it's not a dash, but so it's still not the right one you you posted there.
Yeah, you are missing a dash between KR and I2K, I think. So should be, let me try it.
So the container name needs to be a lowercase version of the GitHub name?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so since Raphaël is out, since some people could already run their workflows, I will go on with the next exercise so that you can do something instead of waiting, and then we will still come back to any of you if you have personal issues and try to solve them. So I will share my screen again for the next part. Okay. So we are at exercise 2 now. And okay, so so far what we have is the same workflow, all of us in BIAFLOWS. So of course now we want to change the macro itself, no, and so that you can make it your own and or try different algorithms, no, in there. So this is what I will guide you through. So first I will give you an overview of what should be done. You will have the slides also to help you, and then I will let you modify your code in the correct way and trigger a new release, this time with your personalized macro, okay? So what we need to do, yes, is first to update the macro itself, obviously, and especially update the part of the macro, the section that is parsing the parameters from command line. Because if you modify the code, I expect that you will need different parameters, functional parameters, no? Then we will have to reflect these parameters in the descriptor of the workflow so that they appear in the UI and we can connect it to the macro, okay? Then we will have to make a slight modification to the wrapper script, Python wrapper script, to also reflect this change of parameters, okay? But it's really like one line to change. And then finally, we will trigger a new release of the workflow. So just by a new release on GitHub, and then this version will automatically show up in BIAFLOWS, this time with your own code, okay? So if it's not clear, please interrupt me. I will go on with what should be modified in the files. No, the Docker file we will not update it. So we will assume that we use the same Imagej Fiji distribution that is configured in the Docker file. So it's Fiji Lifeline from 2017. You can actually look at it in the Docker file, but I recommend you not to change it now, at least for this exercise. And then in case you need to install a plugin that is not installed in this Lifeline version, you would also have to modify the Docker file. No? Again, I don't recommend this, so please try to use the base plugins and functions you have in Imagej, in Fiji. Then we will need to modify the workflow, the macro itself. No? So here I copied the part of the macro that is parsing the parameters from the command line call. Okay, so you can find it at the top of the inside the IGM file. And as you can see, we have this loop here where we are reading the parameters, splitting them, and then retrieving, in that case, 4 parameters. No, so the first 2 are fixed. You should never change them. It's some convention we use in BIAFLOWS. So it's the input and the output folder, no, that I mentioned before. The input folder with the input images and the output folder where in that case, the label masks will be written. No? And then the next 2, in that case, are specific to the template macro we've been using so far. So we only had 2 parameters in the UI, a radius and a threshold. No? So you would have to modify these parameters, maybe changing their names, and maybe adding one other if you have 3 parameters, or removing one. Okay, so you should edit this part of the macro. And then, of course, the functional code that comes afterward, and that will use these variables now to plug them in the functions that are called. Next, so this is, well, the most important part, to modify the functional code in the workflow. And next, we need to reflect these changes. So first of all, in the Json descriptor, okay? So first thing, you might want to modify the description of the workflow. Since you will use a different strategy, you can document this. Next, you will have to update also the parameters in the Json, so that they reflect the change you did in the macro. So you will see the parameters are inside these sections. Okay, you have a description for each of them, so you can tweak it. A default value, their types, so most of the time they are number, and what we call an ID. Okay, that is here. So you should have as many parameters as you parse from your macro. Then still in the Json descriptor, there is a line you will find called command line. Okay, so from this line, you also need to edit the list of parameters that are passed when the wrapper script is called, and they should exactly match the IDs you used in the parameter description here. Okay. The only difference is that here you should use uppercase and here lowercase always. Okay, IDs, and here the parameters pass to the wrapper itself. And finally, the last change, it's still about parameters. In the wrapper script, you will find different sections. So the section 3 is where the workflow is called. So again, here we have a call where you can see that the macro is called. So Imagej is launched with the Java runtime, and then the macro is called. And here again, we passed some parameters to the macro so that it can parse it from the command line. And you should make sure that these parameters here are exactly matching the IDs you've been using here. Okay. And then that the name of the parameters passed to the macro are also consistent with the parameters that are parsed by the macro, okay? So that everything can communicate. So once this is done, you can trigger a new release. of your workflow. And if everything goes fine, you should, again, it should compile. You should see it in BIAFLOWS, a new version. So you will see it from the interface, and you run the workflow. So that this time you should see the new parameters in the dialog box appearing. So that's it for the presentation. So you have the slides. Please try this by yourself. Okay, I can stop sharing. And also ask any question before starting if something is unclear.
So in the chat, I put an example of a workflow one attendee did yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to see, it's actually a very good one because it yields very good result on the data set. But of course, you can try anything. Or if you are very adventurous, you can even try a workflow outside of Imagej, but I think it will take maybe a little too much time. So is there anyone still having issues here?
If you're a bit shy, you can also leave the same parameters. So that you don't have to make sure everything interconnects in terms of parameter, and just modify the functional part of the macro by using these two parameters. But well, it might be a bit boring, but at least you avoid some possible mistakes by doing this, and you still have your own code. If not, yes, adjust the parameters and modify the code.
So if someone still need help for exercise 1, we are still available. I think that not everyone succeeds, so feel free to ask. It can be through the chat or using your voice.
I'm just wondering what are the types of the parameters that are allowed in the wrapper or the descriptor JSON. I see numbers and strings. Are there something else we can pass?
Yes, I think it can be a Boolean, like a checkbox. Maybe Romain, you have the possible type in your mind. It's also documented, but more in the developer guide, I think, than the basic guide. So Romain, I don't know if you...
Yes, so Boolean number. So number can be an integer or a floating point number. You can have strings. With strings, you can basically pass everything that your workflow can then parse. So it's quite flexible. I don't have any in mind, but there might be others. I can check.
Okay, thanks.
So it's a bit tricky, and we should discuss that afterwards, I think, but it might be possible also as a parameter to use what we call a domain in BIAFLOWS, which basically means that you might be able to link, for example, in the case you are developing deep learning models, it might be possible to link an existing workflow, building a model, and use the identifier of this workflow into the prediction workflow. But it's a bit complicated to explain here. But
yeah, you have more flexibility than just strings. You can actually reference objects from BIAFLOWS. That's what a domain is, but it's more advanced.
Sounds good.
So maybe the people that are still at exercise 1, could you all complete it, or at least are you on track with this?
So mine's still building on Docker Hub. I was just thinking, you know, if it's possible to run these workflows locally, because I can build it pretty quick locally, the entire Docker container. But then it just takes a long time to, I guess it has to rebuild every time maybe.
Yeah, that's true. So you can actually run it locally. If you check the very last slide, I think it's slide 62.
Okay.
You have the command you have to run, but then you have to actually take some other add some parameters to the command line that are actually added automatically by BIAFLOWS when you run it from the interface. But if you want, I can explain you how to get them.
Right. So do I need all these like the private key and all that stuff?
Yeah, you need that. Otherwise, you won't be able to connect to BIAFLOWS and fetch data images, for instance.
I mean, is it possible to run it without just to get the output without connecting to BIAFLOWS?
Yeah, you can also do that. So you have point 2 on slide 62, and on the second white line, you have run the workflow on local images. So you have to specify a mapping between your host operating system folders and a folder inside the container with the -v parameter. And then you have to specify additional flags. So it's true that I've added again host name, public key, etc., but you can omit them if you add a local flag after all your parameters. And you have to specify where are the input and output folders in the Docker container as well.
Yeah, maybe about this, a quick comment with the showing it from a slide. I think it's easier. Yeah. So if I go back to the whole architecture of BIAFLOWS, because we haven't commented this actually, this slide. So this part now I'm sure you're quite familiar with, but this part has not been completely described. So here we have the main instance of BIAFLOWS, that we use more as a vitrine to show the curated workflows, etc. We would also have the sandbox that is actually not on this graph, but it would be another online server, And then you have two other ways to use existing Docker images, workflow images. You can install BIAFLOWS locally if you wish. So then you run your own server, you manage your images, and also the Github you want and the Docker Hub you want to use as trusted source to collect workflows. Okay, so you can do this locally. Also, importantly, the Docker images can be run on a cluster or some additional computing server, so they don't have to run exactly on the same machine that is running BIAFLOWS. So the architecture is flexible to this respect. I mean, it's possible to configure it differently. And then finally, and I think this is the usage case that Romain was describing to Conrad. So you can also run a Docker image completely independently of BIAFLOWS. But then when you call the Docker image, when you run the container locally, you need to pass a local flag. So that in that case, you map the input and output folder to some local folder on your machine, okay? So it's some different ways to reuse existing containers, existing images. And of course, you can also compile an image locally, yes. It's possible, and it might be faster than Docker Hub. But Docker Hub, as Raphaël was saying, there are times when it's really slow, times when it's fast. Okay, so it's a bit let's say annoying, but in any case, like in principle, you shouldn't perform 20 releases on the same day of the same workflow. I mean, you should make sure first it runs locally, and then only you release it. So it's not such a big deal, I would say. Even though we can improve that, yes, by compiling the images, having a service for BIAFLOWS, not just for this operation.
So just one question about the Docker Hub, because when I build locally, it builds quickly because it reuses a lot of the cached layers. But I think I don't know. I remember like we unchecked caching it or something at some point. I was just wondering, is that necessary, or can we use can we speed up the Docker Hub build by caching the layers and only replacing the final layer?
In my case, I usually leave the cache activated. Here we've done that probably to avoid the demo effect where it could have a weird result on your compilation or building.
Okay.
I guess this might also be historical, because when we had a hierarchy of base images before, and then with the caching, we didn't get the right result in the end often. So we deactivated it. But now we changed the scheme and we only have like really standard base images, not our own. So this shouldn't be a problem anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. It should speed up the building, not the first one, but the following ones. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Are there other questions? Some of you could already trigger release for exercise 2, or are you still in it? I can hear you working.
Hi, I'm looking at the BioFlow architectures. I'm a little bit confused about what actually the BioFlow is. Is it at the very beginning? I thought it's just a web interface you're running a server behind. But if I look at the architecture, it's kind of it's based on a Docker image, right, or a Singularity image. So we run all the tools we need inside this image. Is that correct?
So we have a web server for BIAFLOWS using different sets of technologies like spatial database, PostGIS, we have Grails framework, web services, etc., etc. But then the workflows, they are executed indeed within a container, which is actually a Singularity container. So once you build a Docker image, afterwards we convert it to Singularity container so that we are able to launch it on any computing infrastructure without any administrator access or anything, because we are using Slurm, which is a job scheduling for grid computer grids. And so basically Cytomine BIAFLOWS core somehow transfer the Singularity image to a Slurm server so that it can be run on this computing cluster. And the workflow in the container communicate with BIAFLOWS using using the API. So maybe that's something that we did not clearly show. So I will share my screen again and go back to one of these workflow. So if you have a look here in the Docker file, we are actually installing a Python client here, which contains a lot of function to communicate with the BIAFLOW server through HTTP. And we also have these NeBIAS utilities, which are used to compute metrics, etc., convert the label mask, etc. but basically the code that is executed within the container is communicating with the BIAFLOWS servers through this Python library that used RESTful web services. So I don't know if it's more clear for you now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I understand now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I have a question while I'm waiting for this to build. Is there, so when you run on a cluster, you know, sometimes you want a large memory node or a certain number of CPUs or a GPU. How do you manage those resources?
Yes, so the core developer of this part is not here, so I might say stupid things, but so we have the concept of processing server, and I think that we are for now using some kind of default parameters when we launch the script through Slurm. But that's something that could be configured, but there is no direct link for the moment. Like it's not possible for the moment to configure this in BIAFLOWS web interface, but it's somewhere in the core files that when we call Slurm, we pass, I think, some kind of default parameters, but that could be changed.
Yes, so at the moment, I mean, the BIAFLOWS project initially was really centered on benchmarking. So meaning not necessarily huge images or huge computing resources. I mean, just getting to meaningful results for benchmarking. But since we realized that it was quite useful for reproducible deployments, we are slowly moving toward also this direction and trying to make it more flexible. So we on the roadmap, we would like to deal with other image format, as you mentioned, large images, maybe have an automatic way to tile the images and process them by chunks, so that this could be completely automated at the level of the BIAFLOW platforms. And then again, dealing with different computing clusters and being able to allocate resources from these clusters within BIAFLOWS as well. But it's not there yet. I mean, we were coming from the benchmarking, and that was not in the initial picture, let's say. Okay.
Makes sense.
So what we already did, but it's not included in the benchmarking BIAFLOWS server, is we already have some protocols to apply algorithm on very large images. So here I'm showing you the result of an algorithm on a large histology image. So it's possible to do that, but we don't have yet it in BIAFLOWS with the matrix computation, etc. But it will be in the future. But so the core architecture could be applied to large images.
I mean, so one thing we have recently started building is the Nextflow pipeline, and the Nextflow pipeline, if you define an environment for it to run in, you can choose like you know, this part requires a GPU, and then it kind of takes care of routing that. So just not sure if that could be supported through this, but just something to maybe think about.
Okay, thank you. We will have a look at that. I don't know, Sébastien, if you already have a look at that, but
yes. So Nextflow, Galaxy, and all these workflow management systems. I mean, we have them, yes, in the radar, and actually we are interacting with some of the developers and seeing what could be done, in terms of interoperability or going in the same direction. Their focus is more on splitting a workflow into steps and connecting the steps in between this. So in our architecture, we simplify this by having everything in the same image, in the same container, okay? Again, because coming from benchmarking, there is no absolute or real need to have this complete description step by step with description and standard for input and outputs of all the blocks. But yes, we believe that something is doable there. Like we could maybe reach some level of interoperability, you know, so that, for instance, at least they could consume our container in Galaxy or in other workflow management systems. So yeah, it's something we will also consider. Yeah.
So Conrad, your image is still not built on Docker Hub? Because I don't see it in BIAFLOWS, but it's a lot of time. I think it took less time for others.
Yeah, I had to recreate the repository because the name was also wrong there. So I'll double check.
People that are working on exercise 2, if you have some bugging issues or something that is not working as it should, or you're lost, please speak and we can help you.
Yeah, it's actually still pending. They haven't even started running it. I don't know if Docker Hub is just overloaded right now or what. But the other thing is, you know, Docker Hub recently introduced all these limits, right? The pull limit, and so we're kind of actually trying to transition away from it because it's, you know, if you're pulling an image, we've already run into some of the limits with our images.
Yeah, so one option that we will investigate is to have this Docker kind of Docker server just on the same server than BIAFLOWS, for example, and build it locally. So that's one option.
Yeah, at the moment we are limited to 200 pulls from BIAFLOWS server for each 6 hours. So we computed that it should be quite sufficient for the practical, since you are 10 people working at the same time. So I don't think that's the issue now. It's maybe just a peak hour for usage due to many other projects, but not so much due to us, I believe.
Yeah, so GitHub is now has a new Docker image hosting service with the GitHub integrated into GitHub packages. I don't know, maybe we could look into this also.
You mean GitLab or?
No, on GitHub it's very new. It's still in beta, but there's for public images a free service for hosting Docker images with a Git package system. They already had something like this, but now they have a new one.
So I would have a question. I tried to make the modification to have an IC protocol. So I forked your repo, Volker, from the spot detection. And I tried to modify the protocol to have the parameters as entry, the descriptor, but for the wrapper, I see different things for the way you put the parameters. There is like
it's something completely different from the Imagej thing, because the protocols, they can't read parameters like from the command line. So I implemented an IC plugin that does the reading of the parameters.
Okay. So this NJ parameters, is this maybe I could,
if you can show it, I can.
Yeah, I will share my screen.
I promise nothing. It's a long time I didn't look at this.
Okay. So yeah, so I did the modification of the descriptors. I changed the name and the containers. I added one parameter, which is called radius.
Okay.
And I can show you the wrapper.
Yes.
I see here. So this was for spot detection. So there was a scale for the sensitivity. And so there is this parameter to change, but there is also then in the call, I need to keep the input and output folder.
Yes, this is for all BIAFLOWS workflows, yeah.
But then there is also this scale stuff here, so I don't understand what's going on.
This is okay. This is just picking the variable, you know, the scale 3 tenths, so it's shorter, and then here the important thing is the scale. So which one is it? In pass, out pass.
So I can show you the protocol again also if you
scale. So this is what you replace with your stuff, right? Because the scale thing, this was like the spot detection protocol, which had a scale, and yeah, this is where you use your parameters.
But the NG stuff, Marion, it's in fact a way to, so ng.parameters dot blah blah blah. It's a way to get the parameter value from BIAFLOWS web interface in some sense. So the user put the parameter value in the web interface.
Okay.
Then it's so you have to change also this line to get.
Okay. So.
Yes, exactly. Sorry. Yeah.
So this has to.
This would have to be radius.
This has to match the name in the parameter in the descriptor. Yes.
So that this has to match the ID.
Yeah, the ID exactly.
Okay, radius, and this can be anything like Gaussian radius.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And then
you change this in the call.
And in the call,
scale 3 cents, you have to change it.
Yeah. And I need to remove this because this was a parameter from the spot detection, but I don't have this one. I just don't understand why there is a point here. And
okay, so the point is a Python thing, so it means that you will inject what is in the right part of the format into the string, you know, and it will be actually injected where you have braces.
Yes, the braces are the placeholder for the replacement. Yeah.
So
can you clarify what she has to remove and
yeah.
So you should remove the scale to enable equal to true. I mean, this shouldn't.
Yeah, I just understand that the format is applied on all this stuff.
Yeah, on from the call line 31. So when you have Java up to the end,
All this is
Yeah,
the method format is applied on all this. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was applied only on this part. So
No.
And so the value of the in pass will go to the input folder equals blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And then this needs to be changed to this, right?
And finally, you have to add the mention of your parameter after extension equal TIFF, I guess.
Okay, so not here.
So you have to add, you have to add it there, but you have to inject it in the string before the quote.
Yeah, and I need to do something like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you have to put that before the end quote.
Before the end quote. So this is the end quote.
Yeah. So this should go in the end of the.
And then I need one more end quote.
Yeah, indeed.
And it should be on the same line, or does it matter?
It should be on the same line, and then it would be better if the point would be just after the end quote.
Okay. Okay, and then I can put the point.
But Marion, in your protocol, does the parameter name it's radius?
Yes.
Okay. Should be good then.
There is maybe one last thing you would have to check is if you have changed a parameter in the descriptor, you have to check the command line part.
Yeah, it's called radius.
Okay.
So if I go back to this, sorry. So yes.
If you go in the descriptor file, on top you have a part called command line, and you see in the end you have this IC scale tree sensitivity.
Yeah.
So you have to replace it by radius uppercase to say to the cytomine that
okay.
it has to be injected in the command line here.
Okay. And why do we inject only the radius but not the input-output folder? Why this is? Because this is not a user-defined parameter?
So this part is for launching the container, okay? And what you have added into the wrapper file, it will be to launch your protocol. You know?
Okay.
So the container, you only need to pass the radius, but the wrapper file will do everything needed to inject the input and output folders to your protocol.
Okay. Okay, then I hope it's working. I have to try. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So Marion, are you using a specific version of IC or?
I just copied basically the Docker file from Volker. So I just forked the repository that Volker made for the spot detection, and I kept exactly the same Docker file. It's probably not up to date now, so I will have to check.
Yeah. Anyway,
I will have to check this.
If you want, you can contact me afterwards, and we can see how to make more IC stuff work in Neubia.
Okay. Yeah, I will probably need it because I'm like crash testing, so I'm not having so much hopes that it works on the first attempt.
Still, you can try.
Yeah.
So is there anybody working on the Imagej macro example, which is probably a bit simpler as a, let's say, next step to what we've been doing?
Yeah, I have a macro, and I was already uploading it, and then I figured out, oh, I actually have to change this parameter stuff, and that's where I'm at the moment a little bit struggling. But I think it's just a matter of time. Because I don't want to wait 10 minutes uploading and then figuring out, so actually doesn't work.
It's a
balance. The macro works, but now putting it in GitHub with the changes, let's see.
Actually, you can find in the documentation how to do everything locally and test it locally before uploading it. And if you really do not just a small modification, but let's say you want to integrate a new platform, then that's probably the way you want to go.
Indeed, yes. So the first level of test is to run the macro from command line on your own machine with so to check, for instance, if it's parsing correctly the parameters and if the label masks are created. So this is quite easy to do. You don't need anything but the version of Fiji or Imagej you're going to have in the Docker file. So you should use the same version, obviously. And then the next level of debugging, yes, as Volker was saying before, is to actually compile and run the container on your own machine. For this, you need to have Docker installed and also some Python environments to communicate with. Well, no, actually, this is inside the container. No, you probably don't need this, but you need Docker installed, and then you can interactively debug what's going in from inside the container. No?
So I'm trying to run it locally, and it's asking me for a GT folder, ground truth, I guess. Do I need that? And if so, where do I download it?
Romain, you might want to comment on this. So there's a way to run locally without ground truth and without benchmarking. So in case you just want to get the results, and that's probably what you want. You can also do local benchmarking if you wish. That's not the whole idea of the framework, but you could do it. But for this operation to run without benchmarking, and so with ignoring, let's say, the ground truth, you need to pass a special flag to the Docker. So Romain, do you want to comment on this?
So maybe you've already added this flag. It was in the command line I shared on the chat. I don't know if you've I can put it back again. So you have this flag called local that will tell basically the wrapper that it shouldn't connect to any BIAFLOWS instance. It should not compute metrics nor upload them.
So I am actually passing that flag.
Yeah, okay.
And the in folder and the out folder, but then it still asks me for the GT folder.
Okay, so I think it's something I have to fix then. But what you can do is specify the GT folder flag. So you can just add.
Romain, isn't the NMC flag working? No metric calculation.
Oh, it's true. You have to add one flag. So if you don't pass this additional flag, which is NMC, it will attempt to compute the metrics locally without connecting to BIAFLOWS. It's true. I forgot that.
Oh, so what's the flag called?
It's -NMC for no metrics computation.
You have it on the chat.
Yeah.
Ah.
And if you want to have the ground true images, you can download them from BIAFLOWS.
Yeah.
You.
Okay, it works. I have it working locally now.
Great.
Nice. Yes, and you can also download the ground truth images from BIAFLOWS. Okay. Just by default, they are not shown in the list of images. So there is a filter button. Raphaël will show you here if you look at the screen. So yes, by default, they are hidden. And if you click here on ground truth, you will see in the list of images. I don't know what Raphaël is doing. Okay. Here you only see the ground truth images. So by convention, we use the same name as the images with a suffix that is _LBL for label. Okay, so that's the way you know which image is which, but you can also download them, or at least download some of them just to test.
Cool.
Oh, you're muted, Raphaël.
If you want to download all these things directly, it's also possible to get them somewhere in the Github of BIAFLOWS. In the Bootstrap installation procedure, we have links to a zip file containing all the data from BIAFLOWS. But otherwise, you do this one by one by clicking on download here. But then I don't remember, Romain, what is the directory name to put the ground true? Is there any convention? Or?
No, so there is this additional flag that I'm going to write in the chat, which is GT folder, and you can then simply pass a path of a directory inside the container. So if you are running the command not locally, so if you connect to BIAFLOWS, the workflow will download the ground truth into this folder.
Okay.
Konrad, I think your workflow is coming on BIAFLOWS.
Okay.
I see it. So the only things you have to do, but just once, is to enable it. So you go to the, I mean, you can enable one workflow to any problem. So when you have a problem, you configure it in workflows here. You click here on enable, and then you will be able to run it. So I will let you do it. You can run it. I see that we have an issue with Tongli workflow. Tongli, did you solve it?
Yeah, actually, I don't understand why same workflow to run twice, and the first one successful, the second one is just failed.
Oh, it's exactly the same one. Yeah. I remember
Yeah,
that.
it's exactly the same.
Yeah, I remember that I killed one of these, but maybe we can retry. Oops.
Yeah, but I have one that runs successful.
Okay. Marion, do we have any good news or bad news?
So I'm still missing how to actually execute the workflow after it's enabled.
Raphaël, you are muted.
Oh, I think I found it.
You get it?
Yes, okay, sorry.
So Tongli workflow success, no?
Yes, but one of them failed. I don't know why. So do you have any idea why?
Yeah, it seems like a Nanda problem. I don't know where it's come from.
Maybe when executing the workflow from the user interface, but it should not happen that. I don't know, in fact.
It's the first time I workflow running once and not another time. Like this kind of errors we've never seen.
Maybe the value of the parameters in the UI was not correct, but
they are the same for both runs.
You can check, but
I've checked, but they are the same, it seems.
We've also this failed to start.
Ah, yeah, that's probably the error then. Yeah, it's the error. I don't know why it would happen.
yeah, in that case, it's probably not related to BIAFLOW frameworks. It's the software somehow didn't work, no?
Yes, but this is strange. So congratulations, Conrad. You got it.
All right, awesome.
So in that case, is it modified code to change the parameters, Conrad? Or?
No, it's still the first one, I think.
Yeah, that's just the first one.
Okay, it's the first one.
I'm modifying it locally for the second one before I upload.
Okay. Okay, so maybe as a quick check, are you still all online? So we have Conrad, Tong, Marion, and Jan, no? Are you still connected? Yeah, okay. So I will let you finish. I mean, we still have 20 minutes for the session. So if you want to go on and try to have the exercise 2 working, please go ahead. And also feel free to ask us if you want some live debugging. You can also write us, of course, after the tutorial. So please use the forum, the BIAFLOWS forum on Image SC. It's always good practice so that other people can learn from your mistakes or questions. And before closing the session, I will go through 2 or 3 slides that we had planned, and also maybe take more generic questions or feedback from you on the platform, if you think it could fit your needs. So let's go through these slides. I will share my screen.
Maybe Sébastien, just one thing before.
Yeah.
I know we did not apply this, but I think it would be nice if you develop new workflows and make them compatible with BIAFLOWS, that you also put a license in the GitHub repository. So that others can know if they can reuse it and under which conditions.
Yeah.
And that's a message to all of us also. I think we should double check that we have a license associated to the workflows.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Okay, so first I will go through 2, well, quickly because we already covered this, but 2 slides pointing at the common issues, no, that we have faced and you will probably face or already have faced. So most of the time the issues come from naming mismatch. So you've seen this already, but I remind you that your repositories should start with a fixed prefix that is defined for your own trusted source. So we've seen this. And also you should always match Docker repository name and repository name on well, Docker Hub and GitHub, sorry. So, and also have this name properly set in the Json descriptor, no? So that it's pointing to the right workflow image, the right source for Docker Hub. Other common issues are in the passing parameters to the software. So in the concrete case of the Imagej macro, I mean, we've already seen the code that is done behind the scene, no, to call the macro. So you should make sure like the parameters that are retrieved from these ng parameter structures are the one you use in the in the Json descriptor, sorry. And then that the name you use here and here are the name expected by the macro when it's parsing the parameters. If you're using another software that is able to parse parameters from command line, it's all the same. I mean, everything should match so that the parameters are properly read. Okay, so this is for the common issues. I don't know the other one, if you have something else to mention. No. So yeah, the exercise 3 we planned was, so once you get your own code working, your own Imagej macro, then it becomes very simple to change the parameters and see how it impact the results of the benchmark metrics. No? So it's a very convenient way to optimize your parameters on the images that are used for the benchmarking. No? So yeah, it's actually something quite nice and fun. So I invite you to do it once you get your perform this once you get your code working. And then once you optimize them, a good idea is probably to set these values as default values and to release last release of your workflow with these optimized parameters. Actually, so in BIAFLOWS, I can show this to you. We have a system to star workflows. So if you go to, I don't know, let's go to the same problem, workflow runs, okay. So here with this tick box, you've already seen this before, but you can select what you see in the benchmark table, okay. So to restrict it to few workflows if there are many. And you can also star workflow runs, okay. So starring means, well, the way we believe people will use it is to say, okay, this is my optimized run of the workflow, the one I want to keep or show as a reference, no? And then if you go to the images, so yes, Raphaël have already shown that you can add one workflow run layer independently, but you can also add, so if you press here, add all favorites, it will show you all the workflow runs that have been starred by the developer, no? So that are supposedly optimized with optimized parameters. Okay, so it's yeah, another functionality that we hadn't seen yet. So yeah, exercise 3, sorry, is pretty straightforward. I mean, once the code is running, it's just a matter of triggering some runs and changing the parameters, no? Next, yeah, potential homeworks or things you can explore once you're done with the exercises. So we have what we call the wizard that somehow simplifies the adding a new workflow. So it's basically based on the same idea as this practical. It will perform this fork of a repository that is used as template. So it automates some of the steps you've been doing today. We will further work on this, so it's still work in progress. And we decided not to use it today so that you can really see all the steps manually by yourself at least once and understand really what's going on. No? Then, of course, you might want to explore other platforms. So Marion is already doing it for IC, but please, I mean, if you're developing in Python or any other platform, try to add something that you're already working on. You can also add images if there is no images dataset that would correspond to your problems. And I also invite you to actually contribute datasets, especially if they are annotated. That's quite interesting for us. So there is a thread in the forum, in BIAFLOWS forum again, where you can say, look, this dataset, I think it could be there. It could be interesting to have it there. So then we would add it on the main instance. And if you have some workflows that are running on these images, then we would also add them if you wish to make them available to the whole community. Yes, you can contact us, so through the forum is the preferred way. But if it's related to some technical issues, you can also use GitHub and the issue mechanism from GitHub, or even email us. But please try to use the forum first. Finally, BIAFLOWS is published in Patterns, a new journal from Cell Press. So you can have a look. It's going into some details. I mean, most of them we already covered, but you can read the article as well. And in the article, you also have a detailed manual on how to contribute datasets. So the information is a bit redundant with the forum, but still, it's there. And that's it. I mean, the last part actually has already been partly covered, at least between Romain and Conrad. So yes, you can also build, compile the Docker images locally and debug the containers locally. There's a a way to do it, and it's also documented. So going to the documentation here. Here you can see a user guide reflecting what we've been doing today. So only working on GitHub and Docker Hub, and starting from templates. And then you have a developer guide here that is going more in the details of how to run the container locally, compile them, etc. Okay, so please check this information if you wish. And with that, I'm done. So I will open it to your feedback or questions, either on what you are trying to do now, if you want help, or maybe something more generic to finish.
Yeah, any comment is welcome also, but let's go on, Marion.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. The first one is, can you export the metrics in a simple way, or do you have to use this API?
So there is, I think, no simple way to export the metrics, but that's a good suggestion. I think it's not too complicated to do it.
Okay.
Like in a CSV file or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. But at the moment, like using the API would work? Or it's not even...
Probably, but I think we did not put this in the documentation, so we should add it.
Okay. And second question, I was thinking about CLIJ and any type of workflow running on GPU. Is it compatible with BIAFLOWS or?
Yes, it's compatible as long as the server has a GPU. So it's not the case of the sandbox and of the main server. But in principle, I don't think there is any limitation there. Maybe Romain,
you would have to use a Docker file that enables sharing the GPU between the host and the container.
Yeah, so you need the server and you need to tweak also the Docker file. So okay.
Well, I have a couple of questions. Well, first of all, thank you all for the great session here. I'm still working on the second part, but we'll probably follow up on that later. And just a couple of questions about kind of how the types of problems we can use this for. So all the examples that I've seen so far are with like some sort of segmentation or annotation. Is it possible to do just image processing where you say like lens correction, right? Where you take an input image and the output is another image?
Yes, so it's flexible to this respect. So we defined a class of problems so far. So we have nine classes now. Maybe you checked them, but the problem you mentioned is actually not there yet. But new classes of problem can be defined. It's not something that you could do without admin rights. So you would have to locally install BIAFLOWS if you want to really go into these developments. But I would suggest as a first simpler way of doing it, maybe just contacting us and suggesting a problem. If you do so, it would be good to have some example data sets, of course, annotated or some. So we need a reference, we need a ground truth. Even if you do, I don't know, like image registration or anything, any kind of problem you can think of, it should still be done in terms of benchmarking with a reference, no? At least for the public BIAFLOWS. Then if you want to use BIAFLOW for image processing or local computing without benchmarking, then yes, you're completely free, but there is some development involved, of course. If the class you're aiming at using is not there. You also need to define metrics, no? On how to compare the reference to the output of the workflow. So all of this should be defined. It's pretty easy to add new metrics or or new problem classes to the system. I mean, it's actually we've been doing it while we were developing, so it's no big deal.
Okay, cool. And just a follow up to that would be, is it possible to do like a multi-image thing where the input is a bunch of images and you stitch them together, say, into one image, or is it always one-to-one?
This would be a bigger change probably, because yes, there is this one-to-one association so far. So either you have an input image and an output image, which is a mask or whatever it is. So yeah, this would probably require a bit more tweaking, but yeah, I don't think it's too much work. But yeah, it's another layer of, let's say.
Actually, the your workflow, it gets 2 folders and it can do whatever it wants on it. And then I'm not sure about the matrix computation and this stuff. That has to be tweaked probably.
Yeah, this is for the metric part, yeah, and the annotation upload there. I mean, it's streamlined this way at the moment. But yeah, as Volker said, I mean, if you don't do benchmarking, if you don't want to upload the annotation, just run the Docker locally, then it can be anything, like in the output folder. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So to that question, would it potentially work like if we say we have an input folder and then we use, because we have the command in the macro, which is just open. So if we use image sequence and import the image sequence, the normal command from Imagej as a stack, that could work.
So we solved this by using omitif. So we try to promote single file per image, whether it's 2D, 3D, 3D plus time, etc. And omitif is a good way to fetch the dimension and read the image properly. So then, for instance, in Imagej, it's only like, it's still an open in a way, and it will also pick the dimension right from an omitif. And yeah, that's the way we did it. We try to promote one image, one single file per image, sorry, regardless of its dimension.
Very cool. Well, sorry, I have to run actually, but thank you all.
No, also Konrad, you are done with questions. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I potentially have one because I mean, now we are relying on an Imagej version, which was a Lifeline version. So how difficult is it to do? I mean, I've seen on a slide that adding a plugin is not really, is doable. But if that plugin relies already on a higher Imagej or Fiji version, or even on a daily build or something like that, how?
I will show you, okay? I will show you by sharing my screen. It's easier, so, okay. So if we get back to the server, okay, the workflow runs, I will open one of your workflows and I will go to the source code on GitHub. Okay, fine. Let's pick an official workflow. Okay. Problem. Oops. Okay. Or one from yesterday. Okay. So if you go to the Docker file, this is where it's done. So yes, okay, you configure the operating system you use, etc. This is related to communication with BIAFLOWS. And here we have the installation of Fiji in that case. So as you can see, it's fetching it from this URL. So this is the Linux version, and this is the name, or the date of the Lifeline version we use. So you would have to change this and use one distribution that is available publicly on any URL. So it can be the official Imagej, probably it makes more sense, or something you provide. But there is no limitation, yes. It's quite easy to change. And
actually,
yeah.
In the preparation, my macro didn't work as expected with this old version. So I updated it to another archived version, which is from November 2020. And I just changed this link there, and that worked fine. Of course, you could also go and you can do anything in the Docker file, right? So you could even use like the Maven that is normally used to build Fiji. But the problem is it's kind of preferable, I think, for reproducibility to have like a fixed, really a fixed version, because if you run like some Maven installation stuff, then you not in control which versions this will install. But you can do it also.
Yeah, and then to finish here, you can see that we are installing some plugins in pretty much the same way, fetching them from some URL, okay? Image Science Feature J. So yes, for complete reproducibility, you want to keep the image once it's compiled. You don't want even to recompile it at a later time, because there is always a small risk that some dependency is updated. So the full reproducibility is to keep the compiled image somewhere. So all the latest release, at least on the server, are kept there. So they could also be fetched directly from BIAFLOWS server. But yeah. So
okay, thanks.
Sure. So I don't know if there are any other questions. We reached the time.
Just maybe to answer the question of Raphaël. So the workflow doesn't work because I think the version of the utilities is not the latest. It's the same issue we had with GIT debug.
So this is for Marion? Or?
Yes,
yeah,
for Marion.
So what should be changed?
So you should maybe take the first workflow sorry, you have forked today.
Yeah.
And check. Maybe I can share my screen.
Because
yeah,
I transported, I got this error probably because I forked a repo from Volker, and I probably copied some stuff that was left there.
Marion, is that this, as Volker was saying, this workflow is a bit old.
Yeah.
It's something he's been working on a long time ago. So we have not updated. It's our fault. I mean, we should do this so that at least the official workflows are all updated to the latest client to communicate with us, because we did some change and something has broken. So yeah.
So what you should do is actually change this part, the Cytoman installation, to use.
Sorry, can you make it a bit bigger?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the Docker file, when you install Cytoman Python client, so
you should use this version.
Okay.
And then maybe the new bias utilities.
Yes, indeed. And then you should go to the installation of what was called NuBias utilities, but is now called BIAFLOWS utilities. So you would have to copy paste this into your Docker file to replace the old installation command.
And then the wrapper script also, no, because the class is not.
Yeah, indeed.
Yes.
Maybe
wrapper. There is also.
Yeah. There are a few changes to make in the wrapper file.
Okay.
So let me show.
I can share the guide.
Yeah, it would be good. Basically, for the wrapper file, tell me if I'm going too fast.
No, it's fine.
It's fine, okay.
Okay.
So you have to replace NuBias WG5 by BIAFLOWS here, and you have to replace NuBias by BIAFLOWS here, and it should be it should be all right, I think.
Yeah, I think Volker did this workflow like when we were in Hungary, no? Something like that. No bias in
Seged.
Yeah.
And you would have also to change BIAFLOWS in this. It's NuBias to BIAFLOWS in this location, line 7.
Okay.
Marion, if you do not succeed, just drop us a line on Imagej C. And we could even go to your GitHub and maybe make some changes.
So Marion, I also copied the guide in the chat. So describing what Romain told you. So it's more something internal for us for the transition, but hopefully at some time at some point we won't need it, but you can use it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So any other questions? So are you planning to contribute workflows or data sets? Do you think it makes sense for your own projects or aims?
Yes, I would say at least for me, it makes sense to document it for the IC part.
Yes, maybe also any feedback from the way we are using protocols, etc.
Okay.
Maybe it's not the perfect way, or maybe it's a bit outdated. Let us know.
Yeah, I think it was Stéphane d'Allongeville, no, that helped us at
yes, but again,
it
was in Szeged, so it's like 2 or 3 years ago. So maybe there are